Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Dan Barker.
I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor. Dan and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this show.
FFRF is a national organization of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, working to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about the views of non-theists.
And today we are asking, are evangelicals dying out? If you have any questions during this live show, you can ask them in the Facebook comments or by sending an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
And to help us answer the question, are evangelicals dying out? And many other questions about religion in America, including the question that are the non-religious and unaffiliated here to stay as almost a quarter of the population? We are delighted to have with us a leading researcher of religion. Robert P. Jones is the CEO and founder of Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI. Jones holds a PhD in religion from Emory University and an MDiv from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary.
And Robert P. Jones is the author of the books The End of White Christian America and White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity, which, by the way, has just been released in a paperback version with some updates.
Last month, PRRI released their inaugural 2020 Census of American Religion, which reveals unprecedented county-level data on religious diversity and religious identity in the United States. It provides the most detailed estimates of American religious affiliation since the U.S. Census Bureau last collected religious data in 1957. So, Robert P. Jones, welcome to Ask an Atheist.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we should preface this by saying we're not asking an atheist, of course. You're not an atheist, come out of the religious background, but a divine researcher.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So tell us about the survey. When was it conducted, and how many respondents did you have on this? Is the 2020 religious census, right?
Right. Well, it's a really unusual and really landmark data set. It represents 7 years of data collection from 2013 through 2019. And it represents nearly 500,000 interviews from Americans across all 50 states. So we've been collecting this data for the last 7 years. And we have been aggregated this data up so that we have like this massive 500,000 person data set. And then we merged it with the American Community Survey from the U.S. Census, which does not have religion data, and we're able to get estimates for 3,142 counties. That's all of them across the U.S. So it's the first time that we have really a rigorous estimate of religious demographics of every county in the U.S.
Well, so that must be a huge data table that you're looking at with that more than 3,000 counties. Wow. So let's look at one of the images from the page about what percentage of people are religious. What's the first image we have there, Bruce? Religious diversity. So this is a map of the entire country with 3,000 plus counties. What is religious diversity? Go back there. Yeah, there we go. What is religious diversity, Robbie?
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to figure out is what is a way we could understand how diverse every county was. So we actually used a pretty widely used method that's used in public health and other actually consumer data. It's called, for the data geeks out there, it's called the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index. And basically what it does is it tries to give you a single number that can give you a sense of how diverse a particular field that you're looking at is. So one way to understand this is that it gives us every county a score from 0 to 1. One would be perfect religious diversity. That is, every religious group in the county is exactly the same size. If that were the case, you would get a score close to 1. If there is a county that was dominated by a single religious group, that would score them down around 0. And so then so we get this range, and what you're looking at there's a heat map of that range from the lowest scoring counties are down around 0.2, the highest ones are up around 0.8. And you can kind of see the heat map there. And a real distinctive, the first thing that jumps out, I think, if you look at the overall pattern, is the light colors in the southeast, right? That's the heavy kind of, the Bible Belt, the heavily white evangelical territory. And this kind of upper right, northeast, so Maine and Vermont, New York, and then the Mountain West and the West, also with higher levels of diversity.
So in other words, when we're looking at the white part of the South, the Bible Belt, there's hardly any religious diversity. Is that right?
There's much less, yeah.
It's much, much lower. Yeah, you can really see that lighter color tells you that there are fewer religions, fewer different religious groups that kind of dominate the landscape in those spaces.
So what's nice about your map, it's interactive. Any viewer can actually go to that map and click on their own county, isn't that right? And that's what
that's right. I should say this is available at prrri.org, and you'll see it right there on the homepage. Click over the Census of American Religion, and then we have a dozen maps, all by county. That you can hover over your county, and it'll tell you kind of what your county score is.
So let's look at, we're in Dane County, Wisconsin. Let's look at Dane County and see how we measure up on this index. Zooming in here to zoom in closer to Dane County, Wisconsin. Where is it? Right there. Okay.
Okay. So
Dane County is 0.78. So how does that? It looks like it's a pretty dark one. Is that pretty good?
So it's pretty. If you kind of convert this to rough numbers, it's basically 8 out of 10. Is a way to kind of convert it. So that's pretty high on the diversity index scale, because it only goes to 10.
So, and then if you can click further and really see the percentages, right, of different religions in each county.
You can. We have separate maps actually for each religion, so you'd have to go to a separate map. But we do have that.
So let's compare Dane County, where we are, with the county where Birmingham, Alabama is.
Oops.
Yeah, I have family in Birmingham, Alabama.
Right there, Jefferson
we used to
County.
have a chapter that was very
Jefferson
active
County is 0.575. So they have less religious diversity there in Jefferson County. Is that what that means?
That's right. So, if you kind of round this up, you could kind of rough numbers. Your county, Wisconsin, 8 out of 10. This one is a little less than 6 out of 10.
Wow.
So we would urge people to go to your county and look it up, and it's pretty edifying. Now, tell us, Robbie, about white evangelicals. It looks like they are losing ground.
Yes, this is something that I really first identified in my first book, my 2016 book that you highlighted earlier, called "The End of White Christian America." It's actually part of a bigger trend of a decline of white Christians overall. But what's new, I think, in the last 10 years is a decline among white evangelical Protestants. So, when we sociologists divide up the landscape and we're looking at white Christian groups, we typically look at 3 big denominational families. One of them is white evangelical Protestants. That tends to be the more conservative end, lean Republican, heavily, in the, as you can see on the map, you're looking at they're heavily in the South. There's white mainline Protestants, which are kind of more upper Midwest, tend to be in the more progressive end of the white Protestant world.
So let's look at that. We have a map of
Catholics.
that, Bruce.
Yep.
Yeah,
Let's put the mainstream Protestants are up to.
Yeah, so you can see a little more kind of upper Midwest. This is kind of the, Norwegian, Swedish Lutherans, coming in, German Lutherans coming into the upper Midwest. You can still see those old immigration patterns, in the data today. And then white Catholics tend to be more bicoastal and more urban, populations. But back to your question about white evangelicals, over the last 10 years, we have been seeing a fairly dramatic drop in the proportion of white evangelical Protestants in the country. So, just to give you a sense of it, if we, run it back, to say 2006, white evangelicals are almost a quarter of the country. They're 23% of the country. Ever since then, that number's really been dropping, and it's been particularly dropping over the last 10 years. And today that number is 14.5%.
So that's
that's a fairly
significant.
dramatic.
Yeah.
It's almost a percentage point a year over the last decade, and you know, demographically speaking, that's a pretty quick slide.
And I might point out we've got maps of the non-religious coming up, but now the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, the non-religious or unaffiliated are 23%, which is what evangelicals were back in the day. So
yeah, back in 2006. Yeah,
significant shift.
So I want to ask you something, Robbie. We saw that mainline Protestants are growing a little bit, which is different because Christianity overall seems to be shrinking in the country, but the mainstreams are growing. Is it possible that some of the evangelicals are shifting more to mainstream? Maybe that's part of the reason?
I think that's a likely or a solid hypothesis. We don't actually have the data to kind of confirm exactly. You know, we don't have panel data that would allow us to see where this person was at point A and the same person was at point B. But historically, the story has very clearly been that, and I should be careful too, that the decline we're seeing is really among white non-Hispanic Christians in the country. That actually the proportion of Latino Christians has been growing. The proportion of African American Christians remaining fairly steady. So it really is a kind of white non-Hispanic Christian phenomenon we're talking about. And what we have seen historically is as those people are leaving white Christian churches, they have very clearly been joining the ranks of the unaffiliated or the nuns. I think in the last 2 years, we have data that dynamic may be complexifying a little bit rather than people being basically none and done. There may be a sliver of them that are actually shifting from white evangelicalism over to the kind of non-evangelical part of the Protestant world.
So is part of this decline due to the fact that the younger generation is just becoming much less religious than they were before?
Yeah, it's a great question. The best evidence we have for kind of seeing what's going on there is that we can look at the median age of groups over time. And essentially what we're seeing is overall a kind of creeping up of the median age so for example, today, the median age of all Americans is 47. But among white evangelicals, it's 56. And that's been going up over time. Like, so for example, if you just kind of look back from the beginning of this data we were collecting 2013 to 2020, so not even a decade, the median age of white evangelicals has risen from 53 to 56. So that tells you that as they're shrinking, they're getting older. So the only way that happens is that you're losing younger people. And in the image you've got up here, you can really see that what we're seeing is there are many, many more unaffiliated among younger Americans today, even than there were, even we go back like, several decades. Like one question I always get is, well, isn't it true that people in their 20s are always less affiliated with churches? And that's true. But if you go back and we look at snapshots from 86, 96, 2006, 2016, kind of march our way up, what we see is we go back to 1986, people in their 20s were still only 10 to 12% unaffiliated. And today, it is nearly 4 in 10 of that group of under the age of 30 that are unaffiliated. So it's really a phenomenon we haven't seen before.
And I'm a co-founder of FFRF, and so it's been more than 40 years. And I can remember speaking to high school and college classes where I felt like they were going to tar and feather me in the 80s and early 90s. So, so even though there's an expectation young people are less religious, that certainly wasn't true 40 years ago.
Bruce, there is a slide that shows median age, if you can find it there, that we were just talking about.
It's a table, I think. Yeah.
It says median age. I think it's there somewhere.
Well,
while I was looking for that, just one comment on that. I mean, you're right. The rise of the unaffiliated is really remarkable. You mentioned the 90s. If we go back to the 1990s and just kind of rewind the clock a little further back to there, even that recently, the number of people who said they were religiously unaffiliated in the country was only in single digits. It was really 5 to 6% of the country. Right, today it's nearly a quarter, so it's quadrupled since the 1990s.
It's been a huge change that we have seen at FFRF. I mean, people were afraid to either come out of the closet or they just were very conventional.
So the unaffiliated are, after 30 years, are leveling off now, it looks like, because back in 1990, I think it was more like 7%, and then in 2000 it was more like 14, and now it's up to the 20. What is it now, like 23, 24?
Yeah, 23.
We saw a dip, wasn't it 24% a couple years ago, and now it's 23, but close enough.
Yeah, in 2018, we had it at 25.5, and now we have it at 23.3. So we have seen a little bit of a leveling off. It's not that surprising when you see such a steep rise in a demographic over time that you're going to find a kind of plateau here. But again, it's still, nearly a quarter of the population. And just one thing to note from that graph you've got up there, it means that groups that we're accustomed to thinking of as culturally dominant, like white evangelicals, white mainline Protestants, that's the National Council of Churches crowd, or white Catholics, are now significantly smaller than the religiously unaffiliated, right? You can see that right there on that chart. So the unaffiliated outnumber really all of these major religious traditions that we think of as kind of being dominant in the culture.
And so I would say, Robbie, that who's wooing us? Politicians don't want to speak to us, and they don't want to woo us, and we're a larger demographic than Catholics, for example, which always used to be the single largest denomination. So your census, 2020 census, is really an eye-opener. I hope it will be charts that are opened by politicians and courts, and that people will pay attention to this shift.
Yeah, but the unaffiliated the unaffiliated and non-religious don't have pastors preaching to their sheep to tell them how they need to vote. Historically, I think politicians imagine that pastors have all this power to control the vote, so they still have some influence.
What were you going to say, Robbie?
Well, it was really along those lines that one of the interesting things about, really in terms of voting, is that even as the religiously unaffiliated group has been growing, up until the last couple of election cycles, people who are religiously unaffiliated have been lagging in terms of their voter turnout relative to other Americans. And so, you would have the unaffiliated are 16% of the country, but they only make up 10% of voters at the ballot box. But over the last couple of election cycles, particularly since 2016, that gap has essentially closed. So now we are seeing the unaffiliated vote relatively in line with their numbers in the general population.
And I should localize this. At the Freedom from Religion Foundation, our typical member is 67 and up, but 98.8% of our members, according to our last survey last year, which was a huge response, are registered voters. So, older people do tend to be registered. So FFRF is older than the typical non-religious or unaffiliated American, but our 35,000 members vote.
So, Bruce, let's just skim through some of these other slides, and maybe Robbie would make some comments about what's our next slide up here. Oh, white evangelicals?
So.
That's by county.
So I think we're going to shift over to something else.
White mainline, we saw that one.
I think that Jewish is going to come up in a minute.
Here's
the Jewish identity.
So I can see it, some of it.
So what percentage of the population are Jews?
Yeah, they're in our survey under 2%. So it's a small group in the country, and also as you can see by that map, very concentrated in just certain areas of the country. But you can see, you can see Florida, you can see New York, you can see California, and you can see those concentrations there. One notable thing, you can also see my county, where I am in Montgomery County, Maryland, which shows up in the top 5 actually counties in the country. It was maybe not one people would think about as high concentration of Jewish Americans, but but there we are.
Now I think we have a map of Black Christians.
Black
Or
Protestants.
Black Protestants by county.
Yeah.
Wow, and you can see the South there.
Very heavily represented.
Yeah, you continue to see the South. That's right, all along Interstate 20, right there across, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia.
And then Hispanic Protestants, which kind of makes sense down there. Southern California, Texas, New Mexico.
And then Mormon. Let's look at the Mormon if that
Mormons, do you have Mormons on there?
There we go. Utah and environments.
I mean, one of the things I love about these maps is that you can really see the history of the country in them still, right? I mean, like I said, you see immigration patterns, and the kind of migration of the LDS Church, across into Utah and Idaho. You can still see, again, kind of Catholic, many Catholics who came in through Ellis Island, still up around, the Northeast. You can see Asian American Pacific Islander, Buddhists and other non-Western religions kind of heavily concentrated in California. So in many ways, it's a kind of look at religion, but it's also really a look at the country's immigration history.
Now let's look at again more deeply at religiously unaffiliated, since that is our audience. So here's that map of religiously unaffiliated, and what would you say about that, Robbie? Any interesting
points?
Mean,
I think what you'd see, especially if you're, you could stand 20 feet away from that and see a pattern, right? It really is the Mountain West and the West, Alaska, and also the Northeast, Maine, Vermont, New York, and then everything gets light, and then, much lighter through the Bible Belt.
May I point out that Dane County is really dark.
I see that.
That's where the Freedom from Religion Foundation headquarters is, and I think that we can take some credit for that. It was a good place to start a group like this, but
I think the next slide shows the New England states.
Yeah.
Oh, religiously
there's
unaffiliated
Dane County,
there's Dane County.
Oh yeah, right, 40%. Yeah.
Yep.
Affiliated. Yeah.
And I think now we're coming up to.
There's Jefferson County at 17%.
Oh, back to Alabama.
Back to Birmingham.
Back to Alabama.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
it's worth noting here that there is kind of a floor here. We measured all the way down, but at the state level, if you kind of aggregate it up to states, even states like Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, states that you do, are in the so-called Bible Belt and you think of as these heavily religious states, it's really notable that even in those states, the percentage of religiously unaffiliated people is still, like in Mississippi, at the state level, it's still 15%.
Yes, that's significant.
In Alabama, it's still 16%, right? So it's more than 1 in 10, nearly 1 in 8 of residents of even those states in the Deep South that are unaffiliated.
Yeah.
And here's New England. You can see a higher concentration up here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you happen to know what is the county that is least religious?
We do. We have like a really fun little thing. For each of these maps, we included the top 10 counties for each kind of religion. And it does what you see, right, is a lot of west, kind of upper northwest and northeast. So our highest two that are really neck and neck and kind of a statistical tie are San Juan County, Washington State, and Multnomah County, Oregon, are kind of the top two. And right after that, Glacier County, Montana, Humboldt County, California, Tompkins County, New York, Windham County, Vermont, right? You see the pattern. These are all like 45% and above.
So what's interesting here, there's Northern California, the only openly non-theistic member of Congress, Jared Huffman represents that top left corner of California there, the 2nd Congressional District, all up and down the coast there, north of San Francisco.
Yeah, and before him was Pete Stark, who was a little south of him.
And when he came out as a non-believer, it didn't hurt his re-election at all. You can tell from that area that he represents.
Yep.
So what do we have another chart coming? I think it's religious affiliation by race and ethnicity.
Oh, you don't have that one? Okay.
Well, more young adults unaffiliated. What do you have, Bruce? Show us.
I think that's all of the pictures.
Oh.
I thought there were more.
Well, I thought there was going. I had sent something about a breakdown by race. So we don't have that? So can you, we don't have a chart, but could you talk a little bit about that? Do you remember offhand, Robbie, the largest unaffiliated group by race or ethnicity is Pacific Island and Asian Americans, correct? At some 38%?
That's right. Yep.
Is that right?
It's 34. 34.
And then how many Black Americans are unaffiliated? Do you remember?
Yeah, so it's still, yeah, I've got this chart up here. So it's interesting. It's as you're right, Asian American and Pacific Islander, a little more than a third, 34%. Right there on the same are also multiracial Americans at 34%.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and then below that, like, so if you go to African Americans, they're 21% unaffiliated. White Americans are 23, right at the national average, and Latinos are at 19, a little below the national average, but still 1 in 5, even among Latinos.
This is a huge change. So unaffiliated are very much represented among all Americans then.
So, you have a median age there. He found the median age charts. There we go. We were talking about this earlier.
So
yeah,
the different ages of the different groups, their median age of the different groups. So why?
Yeah, I think the main thing to kind of note there is all the white Christians at the top.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you can
white
see that.
White evangelicals, white Catholics, white mainline. I mean, they're all 50, median age 50 or above. UUAs as well.
Yeah, they're very liberal.
And then, yeah, right. But then you see kind of as you get into not traditions that are not white, not predominantly white, Jews, and particularly as you kind of move into Latinos and non-Western traditions, Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims, you see the median age kind of much lower. And the unaffiliated are down there, 38. So, unaffiliated are nearly 10 years younger on average than the American population.
So before we see if there's questions, Robbie, you've written a great deal about white supremacy in white Christianity, and I know that you're very concerned about the attacks against critical race theory, and it's true that the Southern Democrats have taken a stance on that, correct? Against it. The Southern Baptists,
I'm
sorry,
it's really
Southern Baptists.
It's right. I wrote about this in an earlier piece this year, but it has become, I think, kind of the bogeyman, word. Critical race theory. It sounds kind of scary, and it's said in hushed tones. And but I think I should just be clear that I really don't think there isn't a critical race theory debate, and if there is one, it's taking place in law schools and legal theory classrooms. But there is no big critical race theory debate in the country. What there is a propaganda campaign, really is the easiest way to put it, that is really a preemptive strike to try to prevent, a more honest telling of our racial history in the country. I mean, that's really what this is all about at the end of the day. And Southern Baptists, which is the denomination which I grew up, the very founding of the denomination was as a denomination that was declaring that chattel slavery based on the color of one's skin was perfectly compatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like, that was its founding principle. It's in writing. It wasn't like soft pedaled. I mean, it is declared openly in black and white in writing. I mean, that was the founding of the denomination, which, by the way, today is still, even though it has shrunk, as we've talked about, it remains the largest Christian denomination largest Protestant denomination of any kind in the country today is the one with that history. And I think we're at this moment of racial reckoning where people are being called to account for that history. Mm-hmm. And this whole thing around critical race theory is just a red herring to prevent, an honest accounting.
Yeah, don't say anything bad about America. We are a great country, right? There's this sort of suppression of our history, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think even with that statement, I'm always, it's really worth interrogating who the we is in those kinds of statements, right? Our country, it very clearly in most of those references, if you kind of just take a moment and pause and unpack it, those references are really to a white Christian country. and that's the country that they're lamenting. That vision of the country that they're lamenting is, passing from the scene.
Mm.
I can't remember whether the 2020 census looked into partisanship. Does it talk about Republican versus Democrat?
Yeah, we did take a look at that. A couple of interesting things, and to my mind, if someone's concerned about a healthy democracy, troubling things is that we are finding that the two parties are looking increasingly different in terms of race and religion. And we look at the Republican Party today, it is about 2/3 white and Christian. It's about 3 in 10 just white evangelical.
Wow.
But if you add other white Christians to the mix, it's about 2/3 white and Christian. The Democratic Party is only about 1/3 white and Christian. So we have this kind of and those numbers, have gotten, the distance between the two parties has gotten more distinct over time. So, one concern, a real concern is that we may be looking at right before our eyes, a party that's going to essentially become a white Christian party, right? And then the Democratic Party will be the party of everyone else. Now, long term, that's certainly not a formula for success, but there may be some short-term ways, as we've seen, that may play out to some political advantage. The one reason it's probably not a long-term recipe for success is because of how the country is changing. And I think that in many ways, those are what we're seeing is a lot of last stands as the country changes all around white Christians in the country. But like Democrats basically look like 30-year-old America in terms of race and religion, and Republicans look about like 70-year-old America in terms of race and its racial and religious
He's
makeup.
71, so we don't want to denigrate them, but
Well, he's speaking in general terms, right?
well, and you have some Native American in there.
Yeah.
So you did do epilogue, perhaps, or an update to White Too Long, your book that just came out in paperback. Didn't you mentioning January 6th? Is that right, Robbie?
Yeah, that's right. One of the, so the book White Too Long came out in 2020. So obviously the book was closed, and before any of the protests after the killing of George Floyd were there. The kind of eruption of new and larger Black Lives Matter protests all across the country. So I had a little opportunity before the paperback came out just a few weeks ago, to write a new afterword and spend some time reflecting on that. Because I do think one of the more chilling things I've seen, in decades of studying kind of religion in this country, is this really, what I've called an unholy mixture of white supremacy and Christianity that was literally on display, not just figuratively, but literally on display with the symbols, the flags that the insurrectionists were carrying on January 6th. And, I think a lot of press covered the Confederate flags and the other white supremacist symbols, but there was not really enough coverage, I think, of the Christian flag, which is the same flag that I grew up seeing in my little Southern Baptist church growing up. There was the Christian flag on one side of the pulpit and the American flag on the other. And that Christian flag we saw marched into the breached Capitol building right alongside the Confederate flag and other symbols of white supremacy. And I found that just deeply, deeply chilling, and something I think we really have to take seriously rather than dismissing that as incidental.
Something that would really kind of describe Christian nationalism as a political force that's allied with white supremacy. I'm sure you caught that Officer Hodge in his testimony last week about being practically killed defending the Capitol, did mention the elements of Christianity that were there at the Capitol.
No, that's right. He mentioned both the Confederate flag. He said, it's a Confederate flag over here and a Christian flag over here as he was being attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, it's been a pleasure going through the survey with you and having an expert, but would you be able to stay on for some questions?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Happy to.
Okay, so we do have some questions from viewers. Here's a viewer named Ann B. And she asked, do you have any information about whether the changing demographics of our population is reflected in the demographics of our political representatives?
Oh, that's a great question. The answer is not so well.
Yeah.
What we tend to see is this real lag in the composition of our elected officials and what the demographics look like on the ground. Part of the reason for that is they tend to be much older. People who get elected tend to be much older than the general population. So, yeah, absolutely not. We are certainly not seeing anything like the diversity on the ground being, approximated in our elected officials.
Or I would add in our courts, especially the Supreme Court.
Right.
Well, maybe we're seeing a little inkling of a change with this new Congressional Free Thought Caucus, for example, which is pretty historic. So maybe we're seeing a little of that, of the future starting to happen here.
Yeah, and I'll give a little shout out to Jamie Raskin, who's actually my representative.
Oh, really?
Who's the co-chair.
Wow.
Wow.
And he's on the commission for January 6th, too.
Right.
Here's another question from Blake S. Blake is asking, what do you think is driving evangelicals toward non-belief rather than toward more mainstream Protestant denominations? Well, there's a loaded question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good studies on this, and what they tend to point to is a combination of things. One is that we really see this beginning and really take off the last 10 years, but it starts a little earlier than that, and it's essentially people, white evangelicals who came of age. So basically, I'm 53. People who are kind of a little bit younger than me, who came of age as the Christian right was ascending, right, and was in its heyday, the moral majority, those kinds of groups. That became hyper politicized. And so what we do hear from younger people particularly is this identification or this kind of knee-jerk identification that if you are Christian, you must be Republican. That I think is very distasteful to most younger Americans. And then the other things I would say that are very clearly is that as this younger group, which is very, very large, is coming of age, many white Christian churches are taking even more conservative turn and staking out positions that are anti-gay, that are anti-immigrant, that are anti-science, all of these things that run against the values of Americans under the age of 40. So there's a kind of real rift, I think, in the kind of positions that those churches staked out and the values of this younger generation. That's also led, I think, to a lot of this. I'll never forget a study that was conducted actually by an evangelical organization about 10 years ago when they asked young people, they were like under 15 to 24-year-olds in that study, to just free associate and give them the top three adjectives that they thought described modern day Christianity. The top three that came through were hypocritical, anti-gay, and judgmental.
Yeah.
And they could any kind of positive stuff too, but that's from an evangelical. So I think that it created a kind of brand problem, really, that and values crisis that really created a lot of dissonance with younger Americans, and we're seeing that in the numbers today.
And we see that we actually have 6 student essay competitions. One is Spanish speaking, but the others we help judge, and it's just overwhelming the concern of high school seniors or ongoing college students about the anti-gay hate, the haters in religion. As well, we see concern about women's rights, abortion rights, but we see that. We get hundreds of these essays every year, and it's thousands, really.
So, Robbie, in 20 years, when PRI does another census, after these young people start voting in the next decade or two, I bet you we're going to see some significant differences, aren't we?
I would think so. I mean, you feel like every time I'm asked to kind of do the future thing, I want to put that little asterisk that you see at the bottom of your retirement account statement. It says past performance is no predictor of future success.
Yeah.
But the best way, I think, to look into the crystal ball about the future, you can look at the trends and you can kind of extend trends out, and you can also look at these median age numbers, and to me, when I, certainly if I were a strategist inside, a white evangelical denomination, I'd be deeply, deeply concerned about a median age that has gone up to 56, right? As a group is becoming smaller, it's going to be extremely hard to reverse a trend like that.
We have another question. Ellen Moranis is asking, what do you think accounts for how much more comfortable people are now with openly identifying as non-religious versus 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, well, first I should say I agree with the premise that there is much less stigma about that. I think one, I'm going to tell a very quick story about Max Weber, German sociologist that came over to the U.S. And one of my favorite stories of his is he was observing, just kind of following a friend of his around as part of his research and understanding American culture. And his friend was a physician, and he followed him into the examining room. And a guy came in for an exam, laid down on the table, and before the procedure began, the guy sat up and said, "I want you to know that I'm a member in good standing at the First Methodist Church down the street." And then laid down, and the doctor said, "Okay, great." And they laid down for the procedure. Guy left, and Weber said, "What was that about? Like, why in the world would he tell you that?" And he said, "Oh, he was telling me he was good for the bill." And the reason I tell you that story, right, is because I think there was this tight association between being a moral, upstanding citizen and being a member of a church, right?
No question.
And today, I think that's not there at all. In fact, when we've interviewed young people who are members of churches, increasingly endangered species, when we asked them, like, well, why are you, how is it that you talk to your friends about this, given that most of them are not in churches? And one of them, gave this very defensive thing. And she said, well, the first thing I say is it's not that kind of church. Right. And that was because she knew what the assumptions were on the other hand. And I think the tables have really turned in many ways because of the way that the Christian right became completely associated with not only Christianity, but religion in general, as being this kind of hard-edged, hyper-partisan, anti-gay, kind of a meanness to it that I think has been very troubling, and certainly nothing that rings and smacks of morality, right? If anything, it's the opposite.
I do have to say that the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is an established group that pays its bills, still has not been able to find a major PR firm that is willing to work with us. And the reason is because they want to be able to put on their website and parade to new clients the other work that they're doing, and then they think that we would ruin it. And it was only until 2007 that we were able to buy billboards. It was only 2006 that we were able to get a radio show paid. And now we don't have to pay for it, but to buy TV time. So there's still a lot of censorship, or not First Amendment censorship, but business censorship and stigma attached to non-believers, unfortunately. But obviously, I would think that would be changing for the better. It is changing.
A little by little, yeah. So here's a question. It's to all of us. I suppose maybe Annie Laurie might answer this one. Tammy R. is asking, it's hard to find groups for atheist people of color. Do you know of any groups or events specifically for non-believing people of color?
Well, I can say that for Black non-believers, there's the group Black non-believers that is run by Mandisa Thomas. And then there's Hispanic American Freethinkers, David Tamayo and Hypatia Alexandria run that group. And if you're interested in supporting people of color, especially women, FFRIVIS is co-sponsoring with Black non-believers and other groups, a group that Black non-believers is putting on a conference at the end of September in Chicago, Women of Color Beyond Belief. And it is open to everyone. So you can go online and find out how to, it's their second conference. They had to change the one last year because of the pandemic, but it's the second annual conference for women of color beyond belief. So, and of course there's some regional groups. Did I miss any other major group? I'm not aware of an Asian American, per se, free thought group.
There is a Facebook page for indigenous non-believers, which I and Brent Michael Davids and my brother, as members of Native American tribes, with a small, if you're an indigenous atheist or agnostic, you can look for indigenous freethinkers page. And then, of course, ex-Muslims, if you're...
Ex-Muslims of North America.
Ex-Muslims of North America, there's a large group of those people as well. So one last question. Thank you for hanging on with us here, Robbie. Kathy,
Sure.
Kathy F. is asking, how do we get our government to pay attention to the growing group of non-believers and convince them to reconsider religion and government, like the In God We Trust bills that are being introduced all over the country?
Well, I don't know if you have an opinion about that, Robbie.
Well, I mean, the neuron that's firing, I think, is from my home state of Mississippi, where we had a kind of victory and maybe a defeat all at the same time.
Yes.
With the state flag, right? So on the one hand, this year is the first year since 1894 that my home state's flag of Mississippi has not had the Confederate battle flag incorporated into it. So that's a great long fight won. But as part of the deal that got cut, it's now it's actually kind of a beautiful flag with a magnolia in it. But part of the deal that got cut was to insert "In God We Trust," on the bottom of the flag. And I think it's another one of those things of realizing like the history of that and how recent that history really is. Not until the 1950s that we get that motto, and it really is about a kind of political move to distinguish the U.S. from a campaign to kind of talk about the godless communists, right? Our enemies, the godless communists, and that's really where the impetus to put "In God We Trust" on the money and under God and the pledge really come from. They weren't there originally. So I think kind of knowing that history
1950s
helps,
Yeah, and it's done such a disservice because whole generations have grown up a misunderstanding that we do have a separation of state and church, and Americans can be any religion they like or no religion at all, and it's done a horrible disservice. We have tried to sue, others have tried to sue, will continue to agitate, and I felt that the best response to January 6th was to revive and resuscitate the original motto, E pluribus unum, from many come one, celebrating the idea of many people of different backgrounds and beliefs joining together in one country, a secular country. And we do have a beautiful new sticker and a decal that FFRF has available in our shop, to kind of in a T-shirt with those words on it, to try to revive that whole concept.
Well, thank you, Robbie. Robert P. Jones, founder and CEO of Public Religion Research Institute. What is your webpage? How can people find those gorgeous maps that you put together?
Yeah, we are at prri.org, and then there's the report's right there on the homepage carousel. You can find it.
And we should say, if you're watching right now, you can also get a heads up on our radio show guest this week on Thursday. It's Candace Gorham, who has written Exodus,
Ebony Exodus
for Black Women Leaving Religion. She has a new book out on grief. She'll be interviewed tomorrow. And then we also want to point out we're in the midst of something exciting. We are launching a brand new website. It's from the ground up. I hope it's going to go smoothly. It's actually today. So if we give you web addresses to visit and they don't work immediately, try again in a day or two. And we are so grateful to you, Robert Jones, for joining us and for your definitive work at PRRI. Thank you.
And viewers,
thanks for having me.
Viewers, you can tune in next week for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.